Well, here's what happens. When you enter onto the path, one of the first things that you do is you do your lundro, or preliminary practice. And that's good because there are 5 main accumulations. The 5 main accumulations are meant to eradicate, to diminish, to undo, however you want to put it, the 5 senses, but more than that, the endless habitual tendency and gross defilement of our nature that those senses actually represent. For in the same way that that cat is born a cat because he has the habit of killing in the past, and it's just a knee-jerk thing, that's just, remember the jaw and the crazy eyes and all that, that's just instinct. It's so tightly wound. We are born ready to see the world out there, ready to focus on something out there, ready to feel good or bad because somebody does something to us, touch, feed, hold, whatever. Now, why would you set up a kid like that? Well, we are set up like that because, once again, it is the very display of our karma. It is the display of our karma. Another way you could look at it, let's say if you had the eyes of a Buddha, you could see this primordial luminosity without limits, without contrivance, without beginning or end. But you would also see within that mind stream patterns. Patterns like dreams. Patterns that, well, they aren't anything like the profound sea of luminosity that is our nature. You can't cut that with a knife. You can't get rid of it. You can't buy it. You can't sell it. You can't construct it. You can't deconstruct it. And that luminosity is seen also with patterns. Kind of, and we're limited in language here. Like Tibetan has so many ways to describe different luminosity and different consciousness and different mind states, and we don't have that. So I had to be born part Italian so I can do all this. So you can understand better. I hope it helps. So here's this unborn luminosity. And here's the not quite good analogy. Like a prism or a crystal breaks up light. Does that light become red? Did we change it to blue? That's not really how it is. The light is the light. The crystal is the lens of habitual tendency. There is nothing that is your nature other than the great bodhicitta. Arising from emptiness in spontaneous display is the great bodhicitta, which is the fountain of your being. The bodhicitta is the awakening nature, or the nature in display. When we think of emptiness, we think of emptiness as being stagnant. Lonely. Don't we hate that word? Lonely. We don't want anything to be empty. But that is not the nature. Because from this fundamental, uncontrived view is the emanation of every color. The dance of display is what's happening here. But because we sit and maintain ourselves in a state of non-recognition, because we have brought into this life these gross habitual tendencies so strong that everything is measured in distance and time and senses, you know? I have this, you have that. I want this, you get that. All that gross stuff is happening on, and it's such a powerful dream, more like a narcotic. Because once we begin to combine those colors, we get a little drunk with it, you know? And maybe that's how it was in the beginning. I always think it's like that. Although Lord Buddha says, don't even waste your time thinking how it started. Be here now. But I like to play with that a little. And I think once you start combining those colors in some way, maybe there is some will there, and the display happens, and we mixed up red and green. Now we've got brown. Now we've decided, I'm not so sure I like brown. I think I like the red one I like this one better over here. This one better over here. And as we start going down the road in our display, there's attraction and repulsion. I like red. I like pink. I don't like brown. I hope there's lots of red in my life. I hope there's lots of pink in my life. But I hope there's no brown in my life. Now I'm being silly about it, but that is our nature. We who are this uncontrived, primordial luminosity, free of conceptualization, unborn and yet completely accomplished, we who are this are screwing around with colors. You know, a little brown. It's kind of an analogy to make us understand how this sleepiness occurs. Like, again, almost in a narcotic way. I love the colors. We love our good works. We love our bad works. We love everything we do. We love excitement. We love a good hit of fun. We even love to suffer, because it reminds us of who we are, like we need reminding. We love it all. We love to get away with stuff. We love warmth. We love to be comfortable. We just love to be comfortable. And we have all these things that, time out of mind, we grow more and more attached, more and more attached. Because I have attraction for this and repulsion for that. How'd that happen? Because everything happens. Because uncontrived primordial luminosity is spontaneously complete and full. But you have to ask yourself, with all of that going on, is that any reason to be deluded? I mean, think about it. Is that a good enough reason to be lost in the barbiturate, narcotic dance of samsara? Well, you can if you want to, but I have to warn you, it always results in old age, sickness, and death. That's if you're human. The other realms are worse. The other unseen and seen realms of cyclic existence are far more difficult than this. And yet we are this uncontrived primordial view. In that sleeping, you are suffering. In that sleeping, you are visited with dreams that are born simply of, why, if you took it apart, it would be nothing. Contrivance, conceptualization, because it's your habit. That's it. You see? Why in the world would we be afraid of changing? So, another good example is this. Let me see. How can I do this? What have I got here to play with? I do not have toys. Okay. I have this. Okay. Close your eyes. Close your little eyes. Come on. What happened? You had to open your eyes. Well, what just happened there? What was the ah? It was a reaction, wasn't it? That was a reaction. Now, if you were an extremely nervous type, you might take that home with you. Be a little shaken, because I made a loud noise. According to your habitual tendency, you perceived something. Just a shade different from what the other person perceived. So different that, so subtle that if you compared notes, you'd probably think it was the same. But it's slightly different than what everybody else perceived. So what really happened? All right, what I did was this. Okay, so this went down. Which part did it? Two things met. What happened? Okay, I dropped it. You could say that, okay? All right. Did my hand drop it? Was my hand connected to anything? Where'd the noise come from exactly? Was it contact between that and that? What did it? What did that? Friction. Oh, yeah. Sure. If you really looked at this, what would you see? A bunch of atoms and molecules and scientific stuff that I don't know the names of, and a lot of space in between them. Mostly space. So much of what you see here is space with just an electromagnetic charge holding it together. Seeming to hold it together. Okay? And so when it went down there, vibration, probably some vibration. That's what we'll call it, vibration. But what did you hear? You heard a noise. If this had happened with no one in the room, what would it have been? A miracle, right? All right, I know how you guys think. Pretend we had a machine that did this. Pretend we had a machine that did that, okay? And there was no one in the room to hear it. Would it have been a different event than it was when you heard it? Where's the hearing? If you don't hear it, it's vibration. Molecules crashing together, I guess. Electromagnetic charges going woo. There's physics to this. But if you don't hear it, it's not a sound. Because where's the hearing happening? It's in there somewhere. Which part? Is it this part? Is it in there? Is it that little thing wiggling? Those little hairs in there? You ever heard anything about the inside of your ear? It's got like a drum or something, and it wiggles. So is this wiggling. What the heck is sound anyway? Well, what is it? It's what we put together in a certain way to perceive in a certain way. With our hands, which are ancient habitual tendencies in physical display, and our ears, which are ancient habitual tendencies in a physical display. And that's what happened. What if it was all like that and none of it was anything like what we think? What if it's all perception? A really good way of looking at this is to take two different people. One person, say, has, I don't know, good genes. This person has a pretty level-headed mind. Perhaps in the past, they practiced some meditation. It's not all, they're maybe a tad less neurotic than the rest of us. Okay? Neurotic, definition, acting inappropriately according to what is actually occurring. Remember that. We're living in it. Okay, and then you have somebody else that's a little bit more neurotic. And that person's really a mess. You know, that person blames himself for everything and has kind of funny habits. You've met people like that. Take everything personally, emphasize certain things, make big deals out of most stuff. Heavy breathers, okay? So we have one person like this and one person like that. Now, an event can happen to those two people. That's just what it is. Pretty straightforward event. And those two people will be in entirely different circus arenas. The events will be so different for them. Even sitting in this class, having this teaching. Some of you are going, wow, you know, I hear something I'm catching on to here. I haven't quite got it yet, but I hear something. And somebody else is going, God, I wish it was over. I'm so ready to go home. If I could just get home by 9. And every color in between. So you have to ask yourself, what's happening there? Is the event really so different? I mean, do we have like Ringling Brothers up here with lots of different circus rings doing different things? And of course not. Will you examine that? Will you please come to examine and to think about your own perception? To understand that your perception is habitual tendency, that no one can change it but you. No one can. You can be guided, shown the way, nourished, coddled, threatened, seduced, but you still have to do it. And so what I'm trying to explain to you tonight a little bit is the cause and effect of consciousness, perception. In a way, when you get on the path, you have to get to the point where you don't necessarily believe everything you hear and see or think. Because your mind is habituated towards discursive thought. Discursive thought is rampant, it goes everywhere, it goes to every corner in 10 directions. Why? Because it can. But that does not take away from the extraordinary primordial nature that is your nature. Sadly, you have every right to ignore it. Sadly, you have every opportunity to close your eyes. And you can walk away from hearing about this nature and not own it and not believe it and go outside that door and fall right back into your habitual tendencies and do the same key rap you were doing before you came in here. Key rap, that's a nice way to say crap. You have that right. But that is not the path. And you must not convince yourself that that is the path. When we follow our teachers, we do so because we cannot rely on our own habitual tendencies and discursive thought. Witness, we are in samsara, suffering, old age, sickness, and death. We rely on the guide who is our teacher. And once we have confidence in that teacher, and we are certain that that teacher has the proper qualifications, then from that point on, we must rely more and more on awakening to that nature, and less on being ourselves, on our own habitual tendencies. In America, there is a phenomena, I think, that you don't find in many other countries, particularly in Buddhist countries. We are really taught that it is just a wonderful and precious thing to be totally unique and different from everybody else. That our individualism is such a prize. And we're taught so many things that are odd, like to accumulate lots of stuff, lots of material is that's the way to go. Sure. And that's what makes you a great individual. And even though it still happens that at the time of death we can't take even one bean with us, not even a speck of sand. And we have never been taught, maybe until this time, or at least until we enter onto the path, to begin in a fearless and powerful way to awaken to the recognition of our true primordial nature. You'll know you're there when everything you do brings benefit. We ain't there yet. Most of us have issues that are very personal, should not be made fun of, and in many cases they've driven us through our whole lives, short or long, however long we've been alive. And those issues are based on conceptualization, contrivance, method that is taught to us by samsaric beings of one kind or another, cultural programming. And the mix is bad sometimes because many of us are filled with self-loathing and we don't even know why. And our minds are unstable and unhappy and unpredictable and we don't know why. And it's because we're all a bunch of drunks. Drunk on the barbiturate, the narcotic of sensual samsara. And boy, we are still bending the old elbow, you know. And what we deny ourselves, we drink this shit of contrivance and samsaric crap. And yet we will not even take one sip of the nectar of our own primordial nature. And this is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. I pray that you'll think about this tonight and think deeply. Try not to put this in the category with other things you've heard, bits of advice from here and there. Try to think about how you've shortchanged yourself and therefore shortchanged others. And try to remember that to awaken to the way of recognition is to bring forth the spontaneous, luminous bodhicitta that is your nature. And that bodhicitta is the great compassion, the great concern, and the great gift of being able to benefit sentient beings even in their suffering, and to lead them to freedom. So now's the time to think about getting out of jail. And maybe letting the troops out too, letting others out as well. This is the motivation of Dharma. And this is why we wish to wake up. So that suffering will be ended, so that beings will be liberated from creating the very causes, the very unconscious causes that bring about their suffering. And to awaken in the way that Lord Buddha meant when he said simply, I am awake. And so I'll leave you with that thought tonight, and we can do the closing prayers. In order to receive this or any other teaching, we should establish proper motivation. Of course, if we were coming to be entertained, we'd be better off going to a movie or a picnic or something more entertaining. We're not coming here to be entertained. We're coming here to learn, hopefully to accomplish, hopefully to prepare ourselves in the way that Dharma can prepare us for this and every future life. But most of all, because we are on the path of Mahayana, our motivation should always be, to benefit sentient beings. Because, as I alluded to last night, the main jewel that is our nature is the primordial wisdom nature, the clear, luminous, uncontrived, and spontaneously accomplished nature that cannot be changed or altered in any way. That is the jewel of our being. Without that, there would be no hope for accomplishment. In the same way that you can't get bananas from an apple tree, there would be no hope for any kind of accomplishment if we did not have that Buddha seed. And so that seed is our precious jewel. It is the nature to which we look for all blessings. So that's what I talked about last night, a little bit. And when we come here together today, try to remember that we are practicing on the Mahayana path that not only recognizes that nature, not only seeks to reveal and recognize that nature, which is, of course, why we work on the path so hard and diligently, but beyond that as well, the Mahayana path is about recognition, the recognizing of our non-dual wisdom nature with one another. It's kind of a bad way to put it, because then we think of little spots of nice wisdom nature that are somehow connected, sort of geometrically or something. But really, if we could look with the eyes of the Buddha, there would be nowhere that we could actually determine in truth that you end and I begin, or where I end and you begin. And so lots of times the students will say to the teacher, "How'd you know that?" Or how did you know the timing of that? Or how could you have known that was my question? We get to roll our eyes. So the recognition, the most profound recognition, and of course this is built on the awareness of the emptiness of all phenomena, as well as the emptiness of our nature. And remember, as I said last night, we don't think of emptiness as something void and vacuum and lonely, that scary word. But instead we think of emptiness as being empty of contrivance, empty of limitation, empty of thingness, conceptualization, construct, empty of construct. Imagine if one's mind could do that. To be empty of construct, the mind would simply abide naturally and spontaneously, without going or coming, without hope or fear, simply resting naturally. So difficult, impossible to understand, unless we have accomplished some practice. And so here we are. Again, we are on the Mahayana path, dealing with this new, possibly, recognition, not of the oneness of all that is, because that's too gross. The oneness of all that is still implies a kind of somethingness, doesn't it? But I know here in the New Age we love that. I have recognized the oneness of all that is. Good. What can I tell you? But Mazel Tov, right? But instead, here in Buddhism, we realize the emptiness of self-nature, which is the same as the emptiness of phenomena, which is that complete and yet unborn luminosity. There's a subtlety there, maybe a slight depth and profound understanding, a more deep and profound understanding, to recognize the emptiness. But then in order to recognize the emptiness of self-nature, one must recognize the emptiness of all it is. Phenomena of all beings, all sentient beings, no matter what we see, even though our eyes, because of strong habitual tendencies, so strong that we're born with them. That's how strong the habit is. That's how strong the karma is. Our eyes tell us clearly, she's here and I'm there. And yet here we are trying to recognize this emptiness. Well, one of the ways that we practice is how the Mahayana tradition is practiced. And that is to realize the non-duality of that empty primordial nature in all beings. In other words, we begin to train ourselves to awaken to the nature. And there you stop, because you don't want to say, my nature, I want to awaken to my nature, and maybe later I'll try your nature. That wouldn't work. I mean, you can try that for a little while. In fact, there are many ancient beings, and even beings nowadays, who practice exactly like that. And it is, I think, a step along the way, in that we habituate less toward the ego and gradually begin to awaken to the nature. But here in Mahayana, we go a step further. In realizing the emptiness of all phenomena, in realizing the empty, primordial, luminous nature, in recognizing that, we come to understand that if others suffer, then we are suffering. End of story. And so it's not like suddenly you become a good person or even a great person and you think, oh my gosh, people in Iraq are dying every day. And in that sense, we wouldn't even make the distinction, our soldiers are dying or our civilians are dying. There is no distinction to a Mahayana practitioner. We think instead, this great suffering is happening. And then we may think in compassion, hopefully we do, in order to practice and to awaken the compassion within us. We think, what are they suffering? Can we imagine what it's like to wake up in the morning and think, I've made it through another night, it's a miracle? Can we imagine that, what it's like to go out into the street for food and be killed? Can we imagine having the choice of feeding our families or trying to get some kind of work, or maybe even stealing so that our children can eat, knowing that we might get shot in the back? Can we imagine knowing that there's no job, no way, that it's even kind of disheartening to plant a field of something because bombs hit them nowadays? So we think about that, and what is the conclusion as a Mahayana practitioner that we do ultimately come to? That I cannot bear it. It is not to be borne. To know that sentient beings suffer and that they suffer helplessly and endlessly. Not knowing what to do to end their suffering. Not really even understanding what caused it. And so as a Mahayana practitioner, we come to understand that suffering is unacceptable. That all sentient beings are suffering. And they are suffering in ways that we can hardly bear and can't even imagine. And that because of that, we can no longer remain isolated and dull and neurotic and self-absorbed. We can no longer do this. We must practice in such a way that all sentient beings might be liberated. And then you think, well, okay, I'd like to get on to those people, but how about me first? And now here's the problem with that. Sure, it's our tendency, and we have to forgive ourselves because we've been trained our whole lives that here we are. And we have that habit so profoundly and so strongly that it takes a good deal of effort to change that. And so not only is this compassion for others equal to ourselves, equal for the compassion that we have for ourselves, not only is it a good result of practicing, but it's also the method to end self-absorption. For instance, if we wake up in the morning and we feel and we learn somehow that on this day in some part of the world, heads have been cut off brutally. Deaths have been caused in an indiscriminate way, where both the guilty and the innocent, if you will, lie side by side, dead. Or dreadfully injured, like our soldiers that are coming home from the war, and the civilians that live there in that country, or any country where war is. I'm not trying to be political here, although you're free to read the bumper stickers on the end of my car. The practice of caring for others as if you understood that they were the same as you, that precious seed of enlightenment, that precious Buddha seed, that uncontrived primordial nature that is the very nectar that we wish to drink in order to be free of suffering, that is the profound nature of all beings. And we act as if we understand that. And we act as if we understand their suffering as well, because they don't understand that. They don't know that. One could not kill another human being if we knew that. How could you shoot the Buddha walking down the road? So when we allow ourselves to kill or to disturb or to harm others as though somehow their happiness or their enlightenment was less important than ours, then we are practicing self-absorption. We are practicing the sustaining of our ego. We are stiffening our resolve to be samsaric beings. And we are practicing the destructive and death-providing mantra of ordinary view and samsaric thinking. So we practice as Mahayana Buddhists, thinking that this and everything I do, whether it be this teaching, may it bring some extraordinary benefit to all sentient beings. By this teaching, may I accomplish some branch of the Dharma. May I have in my heart some jewel from the mind of the gurus. May I awaken as the Buddha has awakened, so that in recognition I can be of benefit to sentient beings so that suffering will cease. When we forget to practice in the Mahayana way, and the Mahayana is the great vehicle, when we forget to practice in the Mahayana way, we increase our own self-absorption. And when we increase our own self-absorption, we suffer 100-fold more. Because in increasing our own self-absorption, in concentrating constantly and meditating on how we feel, whether we are comfortable, whether we are satisfied, whether we are happy with what's going on today, whether we are enjoying ourselves, whether we have enough, we are calling forth, drawing forth in a kind of psychic, magnetic way, in a vibrational way, if you will, our karma, which is like those thoughts. If you can imagine that you're not a body at all, but a field of this primordial energy nature, this primordial wisdom nature, that empty nature. But because since time out of time, we have existed in a state of non-recognition and have been fixated like a drunk on the essential reality of the phenomena that we see, and like an addict, and we are all addicted to samsara. We continue interacting and setting things up in subtle and gross ways so that these phenomenal realities and our ego, and even your ego, will continue to remain solid and real and no problem, because we don't like problems. If we think a thing is that way, our tendency is to try to perpetuate it. Because somehow in our confusion, that feels safe. Never mind that this very body that we are so safety-oriented in, that we love to feed and love to care for and love to cherish and love to exercise and love to make comfortable and love to put in a nice house and love to drive a nice car with, that this body isn't even the same thing as it was 20 years ago. Sorry about you young kids. Okay, 10. I see my kids there, little kids. But this body is not the same as it was 20 years ago, and yet how do we feel so stable in it? And we think to ourselves, I'm okay now. I'm all right now. Pretty much, pretty healthy, pretty strong, could still lift both arms, can still walk. So I'm banking on some good, stable time. I'm going to put some money on this ego. I'm going to work on this thing because I'm pretty sure that it's going to keep me going. And because of our confusion and our delusion, we forget that in 10 years, we won't have that same body. In 20 years, we won't have that same body. And in 50 years, we'd be darn lucky if we have a body at all. And yet this is the stability that we depend on, rely on, that we build our little comfort zones around and try not to change. In this state, we ripen ordinary karma. The dementia of samsara. I say dementia because samsara is by its very nature crazy, neurotic. The definition of dementia or neuroses would be acting strange and inappropriate in the situation that one finds oneself. Acting in such an inappropriate way that it makes no sense. We do that every day, every minute of every day. We do not act as if we understand that we are dying. We do not act as if we understand that all sentient beings are revolving in samsara hopelessly and helplessly without any understanding of why any of this is happening to them. We don't act as if we understand that we have a treasure beyond reckoning. That Buddha seed within us absolutely assures us that we can accomplish Dharma, that we can be liberated, that all beings can be liberated.